Hi everyone, and welcome back. I am very pleased today to be joined by Michael von der Schulenburg, a member of the EU Parliament, also who spent 34 years as a UN diplomat. So welcome back to the program.
Thank you. Thank you.
So today we're going to discuss the importance of a peace, understanding and credibility to make peaceful settlements. And again, this is a topic that you are very familiar with. So as the Assistant Secretary General of the United Nations, you've again, as I said, had 35 years in peace and development missions for the United Nations, but you also lived in the different regions or even conflict zones where you're working. So and I do think it's important because, as I said, trust and understanding, credibility, all of this is very important. I thought maybe we could start a bit generic on this and then look more towards current events like Alaska, how this is being built. But do you think we still that this is one of the challenges of our time, the lack of trust and understanding?
I think that this is the challenge of our time. I think there's no trust among people in their states. There's no trust in the European Union among their citizens. There is no trust among what politicians are doing. I mean, there's no trust in political elites. There's no trust between Russia and the others, and no trust in them, and whatever. All the things, if you negotiate in a war, you should not forget you deal with two parties who actually outside the meeting room kill each other. And this is the lowest point of trust you can have. You kill because you don't trust the other one, because you think the other one will do you harm, and therefore you have to kill this person or these people. And so trust is a very important thing. So if we always are so impatient about Istanbul talks and things like this one, I can't understand it. I mean, the biggest war I was involved in was the Iran-Iraq war, and it took the Secretary General at the time, Paris de Cuellar. It was still a real UN Secretary General. Unfortunately, we don't have that anymore. Who went forward and backward, and it took 3 years for them to agree on a ceasefire. It is because there is no trust. People think that if they give in the other one, it's not only what they negotiate, it's also whether what they negotiate will afterwards be kept by the other party. It is almost a more important issue. You know that when you look at the beginning of Trump talking to the Russians, and I think he did very well in the beginning. He offered them, to recognize the Crimea, to recognize that there should be no NATO and all the rest of it. It has not come to it because Putin couldn't trust that Trump will deliver on this. That's what it is. Otherwise, I think we would have had a peace a long time. He could not trust. And why he couldn't trust Trump was largely because of the Europeans, who said at the same time, oh, we just wait until 3.5 years until Trump is gone, and then we do all the things with NATO and all the rest of it again, So I think it's trust, and it's when I listen to all these academics, it's going often lost because, of course, I mean, when you sit on the table, you feel things differently when you talk to people. Trust is our biggest problem, and I think that's also why the meeting in Alaska was so important. That was a typical trust-building exercise. That's what you do when you want to create trust among people. In the end, one person has to trust the other person. One president has to trust the other president, and so on. And that's why I think this meeting was so extremely, extremely successful.
Yeah. Well, trust is kind of the lubricant that makes all cooperation more possible. I know Reagan said trust but verify, but if you don't have trust, it's very difficult to reach any agreement if you assume that the opponent's not going to keep them. And I kind of made that point as well. That's why for the Russians, even if we reach an agreement where we say, well, we're not going to push NATO further in, or we're going to end this conflict, if they don't trust it, the only permanent solution they have then is conquer the territory. At least then it won't fall to NATO in the future.
The only thing is war. I mean, that's what it is. That's what we do now too. You know, it is war. If we don't have trust, you only have a chance to seek a military solution. If you want to negotiate, you need trust. And that's what I think is in Alaska so important.
Yeah. And yeah, because that lack of trust goes both ways. I feel there's no trust for the Europeans of the Russians anymore either. That is, even when the war is being lost or has been lost, there still is a preference of just continuing, even though we can't win. It's quite remarkable. But yeah, I want to shift also to the understanding part, because for me, this is one of the more remarkable things, the lack of understanding our opponents. Because I never hear any discussions about our opponents anymore. What is it that our adversaries are concerned about? What are their security interests? I don't feel we ever have these debates anymore. The Cold War, there was. That is, what are the Soviets worried about? How are they pursuing these objectives? But these days, I never hear anyone talks about what China is worried about, what Russia is worried about, Iran. It's always this almost cartoon character we create, where they all their motivations are created by their internal belligerence or their imperial ambitions, or something that has nothing to do with us. I find this to be dangerous as well. I'm just curious, what do you think about it? Why is there no understanding of our opponents? And I know in German you have an expression, the Putin versteher, someone that understands Putin. I think it's
I'm one of them, you know. I'm not sure that I understand it, but I try to understand it. You know, Glenn, the thing is the absence of diplomacy nowadays. No? I mean, we haven't had this even in the Cold War. I would say that we are probably today in a more dangerous situation, also because of the development of weapon systems than we were in the Cold War, because we don't have diplomacy anymore. And when you negotiate, there are three very simple issues you have to follow. The first one is you have to show respect to the other side. I mean, look how we deal with Putin, probably they with us. No respect whatsoever. The second thing is one has to start listening to the other. One has to listening. And the third one is one has to try to understand the other side. That's also for military, by the way. It's all the same. It's in our families, the same thing. If I have a conflict with my wife, I should not lose the respect. I should listen what she has and try to understand it. And understanding doesn't mean that you agree necessarily with the other side. But the moment you express that you understand the other side, you already take a lot of aggression out of a conflict. And this is a diplomatic thing. And that's actually very simple rules, very difficult to do when you are in war. But we don't follow this anymore. And that makes the situation so extremely difficult. I think we are today in a more dangerous situation even than during the Cold War. And I wanted to go back to this one because I think that's one of the success of this meeting. And but I mean, I'll leave it up to you. Mm-hmm.
No, I'd like to move on to that as well. But I often make the point that this is also a propaganda test to see how, in terms of our ability to understand opponents, that is, are you able to formulate the position of the other side? Can you put words on it? Because if people are not able, that is, either they don't know or they do know what the position is, for example, Russia, but they would feel too uncomfortable to even utter the words, then you have a very profound problem at hand. I mean, I often make the point, I can understand if I was advising Iran, I would think getting nuclear weapons now is the best approach. I think this will be a horrible idea for me, but I can understand why they need a deterrent. If I can see, in Russia, why they're pursuing the policies they are. It doesn't mean I agree with it, but the inability to recognize the position of the opponent, and it's quite remarkable. I just don't understand where this, how we ended up at this, but yeah, I would.
We have always said the self-righteousness of each side is a fuel for war. Self-righteousness. That means you are so convinced that you're right. I mean, look at the EU proposal, these 5 points. they submit there for influencing the negotiations. What is in the proposal? Again, the unprovoked, illegal, by international law, illegal war of aggression of Russia to take territory. Now, if you see the world like this one, you continue to see this for the last 3-4 years, or at least the 3 years. Yeah, there is nothing to negotiate. There's nothing to negotiate. It is self-righteousness. We repeat all the time what we say, and that makes us blind to find a solution. And that's why Europe cannot negotiate peace with Russia at the present time.
Yeah, self-righteousness. I think that's a good point.
Yeah.
It's also why we ended up in this position where the Europeans demand to be able to participate in the negotiations, which seems reasonable given that this is a European war. But on the other hand, they don't want to talk to the Russians. So it's but the demands put forth by the EU, that is massive reparation between $500 billion and $1 trillion.
Yeah.
Russia have to cede all territories. They have to accept the Ukraine's entry into NATO. It's quite extraordinary given that this is that the Russians are winning, and still the EU demands their capitulation. Is this also self-righteousness then, or how do you see it?
Yeah, yes. Yes, self-righteousness makes you blind. I mean, it's unbelievable what happens in Europe. Unbelievable. But I think the Alaska meeting will show the limits of Europe. Europe is in a very difficult position after this one. So if you don't mind, I want to say something about the meeting, because I was just looking at news things, and then not so much, and that there's a big thing, I think it was the New York Times, and saying no deal reached. No, as what are these? I think enormous success of this mission, and I think we should all be happy. I think the Alaska meeting is a game changer. If it's historical, I don't know, that you need more time, but it's a game changer. The meeting takes place exactly at the time where the Ukraine is at the point of military collapse. And the Ukraine must now decide, do they negotiate based on the Russian terms, because the Russians are the winners, or do they continue until they have a military collapse, and possibly also as a follow-up, a political collapse in the country? And I would advise the Ukrainians, negotiate. Don't trust the Europeans. You're negotiating. You should follow the Russians and the Americans in these negotiations. There is no alternative for you if you want to save Ukraine as an independent, functioning state. You have to do that very quickly. And I'm not sure that they're ready for this one. The real, when you look at what Europe has done in the last weeks, the demands, the coalition of the willing to send soldiers into so-called peacekeepers into Ukraine, Merz's insistence to buy Typhoons and sending carriers to attack Moscow, and he's going even one step further and says that will not lead to a nuclear war. If we think that NATO soldiers have helped to shoot these medium-range missiles into Russia, in Germany especially, we announced that we will have a war and we have to prepare for war with Russia in 2029. I mean, what does it sound for Russia? And interestingly, it's a year 29, because it's a year when Trump is no longer president. I mean, it's almost unbelievable what we are doing there. We talk about war. We talk about plans of taking as a revenge Kaliningrad, because it's an enclave which would be easy to conquer militarily. I mean, unbelievable. It's Russian territory. And we say we would stop in international waters the shadow fleet of Russia. I mean, these are all acts of war of NATO countries. And to believe that Russia would not respond with force, including with nuclear force against them, is just lunatic. And this is what we want to do. Now, the great advantage of the Alaska meeting now is that this will not happen anymore. Europe stands now alone. It's very, very clear. Very clear. I mean, the the United States will not support this type of adventurism to turn this war around and prevent that Ukraine loses the war. It will not happen anymore, and we should be very glad. And they actually, for me, when I listened to the press conference, I mean, I'm not a Trump supporter, as you can imagine. No, I mean, not at all, actually. I mean, I thought to myself, we always say Trump, he's crazy and, unpredictable, all the rest of it. But look at our own leaders: Merz, Macron, Starmer, von der Leyen, Rutte. I mean, compared to this one, when I look at this meeting there, Trump towers over them. I mean, we are really the crazy ones. We are the crazy ones. I mean, to think that we are on the way of provoking a nuclear war with Russia, living in Europe. I mean, we will be the first ones who would be killed. And nonetheless, that's what we do. And there will be no negotiations with Russia, no diplomatic way of trying to solve it another way. It's only to use force, threats, and to think about all sorts of ways you could now harm Russia in order to prevent a defeat in the Ukraine. I think it's absolute madness, absolute madness. And now Trump comes out as a more reasonable person, and I think we should be grateful to this one. And I find it difficult to say at the same time. Yeah. I was also thinking that when I saw these pictures, Putin arriving in Alaska, that this meeting recognizes now Russia as a great world power. And if you think that this war started by trying to push Russia only to become at best a regional power, to take it off from the geopolitical map, and by cutting it off from the Black Sea, by bringing countries like Georgia and Ukraine and Moldova into NATO and so on, and circle it all, it has exactly the opposite effect. And that is what is happening now in Alaska is basically a recognition of the results of this war. Russia has won it. Russia will be now the strong country. European Union, who thought they could use a war to unite and to make Europe a great power at par with China and the United States, because that's really the plan of von der Leyen and these people, have failed. I mean, I wouldn't even not surprised if within the next 2 years the European Union will falter. I mean, will at least break somewhere. It will not disappear, but it will somehow break because of our policies in the war with Russia. And the other loser is, of course, Ukraine. So what Trump really did is receiving the winner of this war.
That's typically what one does.
Yeah. And you know how secure they were about the thing is that neither of the two sides had military brass bringing with them. So they all, also visually, when you look at the teams that met there, you didn't have, a row of generals with all their medals and things like this one. No, it's almost as the war is over. And you don't have to talk about the military things anymore. You talk now about other things, the relations with Russia. I mean, that Russia invites the US president to come to Moscow. Unthinkable. But he hasn't said no. And so I think the relations with Russia will be very important. Economic relations they speak about, the Arctic, the space, and luckily also about arms control and things like this one. So there are very important things on the plate which are beyond already the Ukraine war. So in a way they have said, the Ukraine war is something. And to this one, the second thing is that Trump didn't insist anymore on an immediate unconditional ceasefire. At least we didn't hear anything about this anymore. And that means that he recognizes that one has to discuss the root causes first. And he allows basically Russia to continue a war without, I mean, there wasn't any criticizing for this one. So also here, it's a recognition that the realities are now different. They are now different. And, they have not, they probably have, or they have not, I don't know, they haven't said anything to it. whether they have really some parameters of how to end the war, what it is. But it is surely not an unconditional ceasefire, an immediate unconditional ceasefire. So I think they recognize that Russia has a claim that that Ukraine should remain a neutral country. They have a claim to protect the Russian population. They have a claim to have an access to the Black Sea. This is a recognition, and Putin should go. And then the third thing is, which I think is the outcome, is that we know the United States will now withdraw from the Ukraine war, at least militarily. I mean, they have announced it many times before, and there's this interview with Vance just, I think, a week ago on Fox News. United States will not continue to supporting the war efforts of Ukraine. That means the Europeans stand now alone. And because Europeans cannot afford this war, have not the ability to escalate this war, all their plans, which I mentioned before, are basically now defunct. And I'm very happy about this, because it's just crazy. So Europe has somehow to reorient. Ukraine will have to reorient. They know now that they will not be saved by the Europeans, because Europe cannot save them. So their only options, if they act rationally, is to rush to speak with Trump and then with Putin. I mean, they have to make a deal. And I think it shouldn't be such a big deal. I mean, the territories Russia claims have been annexed to the Ukraine only in 1922. 1922. The Crimean Peninsula only in 1954. I mean, Ukraine could very well survive without these territories. It would maybe even make it a more coherent country, because it would more emphasize that Ukraine is Ukraine and not just, Russia with some local dialects of Ukrainian dialect. No, that Ukraine could, I mean, Kiev will always remain a big European capital. Odessa will always remain a big port. They will have Lvov, looking towards the European Union, and Krakow to look towards Russia. I mean, this is still a very big country. And if they continue the war, I mean, all the young people they lose, all the people who flee their countries, I mean, the depopulation of the country, the destruction of any form of industry, of electricity, whatever there is, it's so great. I mean, if they continue the war, they will not survive as a country. And there's even the risk that they lose Odessa, because the rational thing for Russia is, of course, if they don't agree, to take Odessa, because then they really have decapitated Ukraine. And they should prevent it and we should all help them to end this. Europe doesn't do it because it says, oh, you have to continue the war because otherwise it's an unfair peace. But in reality, what we're doing is destroying the Ukraine.
And this is also the point I make, because always in Europe they portrayed as immoral to accept such a loss to Russia. But as you said, every day the situation gets worse for the Ukrainians. That means more Ukrainians killed and who fled, less territory, and all the infrastructure destroyed. They can't rebuild afterwards. The country could collapse. Just for many people, this was quite predictable. That is, people like Henry Kissinger, he made a point back in 2014 that if we do recognize that Russia is a great power, and he said, I do think they are, then we should look at where we can harmonize our interests. Because if you're going to go after them on everything, in my opinion, you end up in a situation where it's winner takes all. So it's all or nothing. And if for someone who used to teach security strategy and military strategy at the university, I made the point that this is the worst position you can be in, because then countries are willing to risk everything, and that's what you're seeing now. I mean, you mentioned Kaliningrad, like, oh, it would be easy to invade Kaliningrad because it's surrounded by NATO countries, it's kind of exposed. But then what? There's 1 million Russians living in Kaliningrad. Are they going to be forcibly expelled? Are they going to be living under NATO occupation, 1 million Russians? I mean, how is Russia gonna just capitulate and say, well, okay, I guess we lost it? What happens the day after? The consequences. This is just that they're able to say these things. It's this is like end of the world stuff, and it's say it with such with
In Kaliningrad, there are nuclear warheads stationed. I mean, what do you think happened to them? Would they dismantle them and hand them over to a German soldier? And of course not. I mean, what do we want to do? But the other thing is, Glenn, Europe has no allies anymore. We have always said we wanted to isolate Russia, but it has not happened. Russia has now been invited to India. They most likely will go with Modi together to the celebrations of the end of the Pacific World War, the World War in the Pacific. I mean, they are not isolated, and their economy is going actually quite surprisingly well, and not ours. So, I mean, Europe behaves against its own interests. Why have the Germans not jumped the bandwagon when Trump started to talk to the Russians? It would be a time to recognize that we pursued a wrong policy, that we need to get along with Russia. We need to get along with China. I mean, look how von der Leyen, how arrogant she behaved in Beijing. I mean, what is the European Union? Very soon, the European Union will only be 4.5% of the world population. And its GDP, according to Pricewaterhouse, will drop to 9% of global output. I mean, who are we? We're still wealthy, blah, blah, blah. But we are not, we are very far away of ever being a superpower. And luckily, and I don't like a European Union as a superpower. We should be a peace power. That's what we were created for. So I think this is a game changer, Alaska. Alaska is a big game changer. And it has prevented that this war slides into a nuclear war. It has accepted the realities of the war. And you want to make peace, you always have, first of all, to accept the realities. You cannot change anything if you don't accept the realities. And the war has created realities. Realities we didn't expect. We did expect that Russia would lose the war. Now it has won the war, and zwar very well won the war. I mean, I'm not for anybody winning wars. I'm against all wars. We should always negotiate things, but we have to recognize the facts. And I don't see any European politicians presently who is willing to do this. I mean, it's our survival, our physical survival, because of the threat of antagonizing a nuclear power, but also our economic survival. I mean, we are breaking. As a trading nation, the European Union, we cut our relations with Russia, Central Asia, and China, and the big countries. I mean, how can we do such a thing? At the same time, we get tariffs from Trump on the other side. We have wars on the southern border. I mean, we are completely surrounded by hostile actions, and we play into the things by making it even worse. What do you think happens when we really increase our military budgets to 5%? Already now, NATO is 55% of all military expenditures are in NATO. 70% of all weapon exports are to proxy states we support. I mean, we are a military monster, and we want now to increase it to 5%. If it ever happens, I don't think it will. It would mean that we control, as we are only the NATO is only 10% of the world population. We control afterwards 75% of all military expenditures in the world. I mean, is this security? It's not security. Also, between Ukraine and Russia, the security is not military alliances or military, we win guarantees. No, it's politics. Security comes from understanding your neighbor and having friendly relations with your neighbors, to make deals where the other side doesn't feel threatened. That's what it is. And if you are a small state and you can't afford it, you better behave like this one. I mean, Mexico could also not join a hostile military alliance against the United States, having military bases there, bringing the Chinese fleet into into the Gulf of Mexico, it wouldn't be possible. Luckily, because this is the reality in the world.
I think it's a state of mind is the problem as well. I think we're having in Europe because, well, when, for example, now the United States got this 99-year lease in Armenia, and this will, of course, cause some more disruption. The main comments I see from media and politicians is, "Oh, this is great. This means less Russian influence, more American. That means peace." I mean, the whole concept of indivisible security, that is to enhance mutual security, is kind of out the window. Everything is this, oh, America's the good guy, Russia's the bad guy. More power for the US in the region, the better. But of course, just like Kaliningrad, when is the reaction? Or as you said, if Russia gets to put some missiles and military bases in Mexico, it's like it doesn't always translate to more security, because the Americans would respond much like the Russians are now.
Also, not more security for the Russians, by the way.
No, definitely not.
And for us also not.
No, I think we had we already played out to Cuba, so no.
Yeah.
But you said before that the EU had these great power ambitions, that the goal in the Ukraine war was to, essentially weaken or knock out the Russians, but then have the EU come up as a global power next to the Chinese and the Americans. But you're you're a member of the EU Parliament. How are you seeing these ambitions expressed? Are they?
Naja, I think first of all, the European Union has taken probably the toughest stance on the Ukraine war. The Ukraine war helps them to unite the states behind them. And if you look even at the latest memorandum, which was not by the European Union, but includes all the European countries, I mean, even Slovakia signed it. I mean, there is a lot of pressure of keeping these things together. And then is, of course, this movement for the militarization of the European Union. I mean, this militarization is, in my view, not covered by any treaties we have. Von der Leyen takes here over powers which are not given to her by any of these treaties. But they do it nonetheless, and the states don't say anything, especially the Germans, who have the greatest influence there, because they feel that this is a way that they will be part, and European Union is largely directed by Germans. It's a part to be at equal with the United States and China, and that is the only future Europe could have. It's a military future that we have things to play, and that's why we see all these expenditures on military equipment. It will not lead to anything. I think it will lead to our collapse, because our social security system, which is actually the great achievements of Europe, if we compare to the United States and other parts of the world, I mean, will collapse. So we will give up on something that is so important for us. I mean, remember, Rutte, the man with daddy and things like this one, has also told us, if we don't give up on this expensive, as he called, medical social security system, we will better learn Russian, he said. I mean, can you imagine? I mean, we have leaders who are absolutely mad. Absolutely mad. I just don't know what to say to it.
No, they shouldn't be allowed to manage a lemonade stand, but instead they are leading the largest military bloc in the world.
It is very interesting now that in the United States, we always considered the most aggressive state, the least politically sophisticated states. We Europeans always look still down as the United States. They have changed, and the voters have put somebody in place who said no longer wars. I mean, when you look at the 20 objectives in Trump's election program for, he calls it Agenda 27, there's only one really on foreign policy, and that says to avoid the World War III. That's what says it. He has a very simple language there, but people understand it. That's it is. And when Trump goes now to in Alaska, he does it against American political and military elites very clearly. The Washington elite, in great majority, doesn't want it. Senators don't want it, and so on and so on. He can only do it because he's been elected as an anti-establishment president. if he holds the line, because the great risk is also here that the trust sort of breaks. But this is a chance, and we don't have it. Look at the German elections. I mean, we are out of the Sarah Wagenknecht as a peace party. It hasn't even gotten 5%. All the parties we are now sitting in the German parliament in one way or another support wars and rearmament and all the things of like that. Even the Linke party says, the democracy is defended on the border to Russia. I mean, this type of thing. It's amazing, and it's an amazing development. And it is a show of a decline of Europe. It is a huge, huge decline. We see also intellectually. I mean, we can hardly, the control of what you say and not say. It's very difficult for me to publish anything. It's or to say something in public. It is so controlled in the meantime, all the things, the sanctions against individuals by the EU for allegedly spreading Russian propaganda. I mean, the decline of the rule of law in Europe, of democracy, of the freedom of speech is enormous in this whole context. Enormous and frightening.
It is interesting how things have shifted, though, because after the Second World War, you had the United States emerge as this economic powerhouse. The Soviet Union was this over-militarized power, and obviously, yeah, for I guess for good reasons after fighting the war. But now it's kind of been shifted around. Today, both not just Americans but the Europeans are now becoming overburdened with this, as you said, this militarism. Meanwhile, if you look towards China, they have become like the America of the 50s. This is an economic miracle, and but it's no, as you said, the problem with this excessive militarism is, as you see in Europe, we have economic decline, social problems growing, the rule of law declining, democracy itself, just the freedom of speech is, as you said, you can't speak openly anymore. Well, not about everything, but on foreign policy, security issues. You have government official truths, and then you have everything else, which is almost seen as a treasonous statement. So it's a very dangerous path going down, which is why it's, as you said before, it's a bit strange that countries like Germany isn't taking this opportunity to say, you know what, this policy was a huge flop. There's no future to it. Trump is shifting, adjusting to new realities, but I can't understand why nothing is being done. Sometimes I think about Machiavelli, wrote like 500 years ago, men see the world as they wish it was, and then they're destroyed. So essentially refusing to see reality as it is. But Germany kind of also, though, the transformation over the past few years has been quite extraordinary. As I think most Europeans look towards Germany as the one who had it all figured out. It was going to be a peaceful actor, an economic miracle. Everything seemed to be organized. I know some things were already getting a bit sketchy before the Russians invaded Ukraine, but how do you explain the massive shifts? Because this is a bit of a concern, as you mentioned, with this recent statement of Merz. This is talking about war with Russia.
I can't understand it. I really can't understand it. I'm sometimes invited to certain debates, and then I have recently with one of these very, very belligerent generals. I mean, I couldn't even understand what he's saying. I mean, I couldn't understand it. There is this boogeyman that the whole world is against us. China's against us, Russia's against us, Iran is against us. And if we don't do now something, we will lose our way of life. It is a time, don't forget, we are at a time where the West has lost two essential wars. It is not only the Ukraine war we have lost. Also Israel, which is our closest ally, has lost the war against Iran. I'm convinced that Iran has a nuclear weapon there. It's a very interesting interview I've seen on this one with a specialist from the United States. It's very easy for them to do. And they will have to do it because they have to expect that Israel will attack again. And I think it will not happen anymore. because Israel knows it's a very small country. One of these devices is enough, and Israel would basically be finished. In Iran is much larger. It's crazy. Israel can also not win the wars in the West Bank, in Gaza. With Hezbollah, they pretend they have won it. They have now killed some leaders, but the Hezbollah will be just the same. And they thought they have won it in Syria, and now they had to bomb the presidential palace for somebody they have helped to put in place in the first place. I mean, Israel is in a conundrum of wars around itself and in all the things. They cannot come out of it. And the strongest adversary, at least how they see it, might have now a nuclear bomb. I mean, interestingly also that the Saudi Arabian prince had called twice Iran to express solidarity. Pakistan has offered to give Iran a nuclear bomb. I mean, don't we get where the world is? That this type of things we do will not be able to continue?
Yeah, no.
I mean, these countries are also there. I mean, they are 90% of the world population. 90%. Who are we? Where do we... When children go in our schools, they see a world map with Europe in the middle, and Europe looks then very much larger than it is in reality because it's sort of in the middle. We still have this image when we have von der Leyen raising her finger in Parliament and saying, now secondary sanctions, if China and these don't do, India doesn't do what we want, we will sanction them. I mean, she doesn't realize that this doesn't work anymore. It will not happen. That's also why the sanctions don't work anymore. We don't control the world economy anymore, not at least as we used to do. And I think then it has something positive about these things. The other countries have not reacted to us by building a NATO or a military alliance that would threaten us. Not. I mean, BRICS is much larger now than the G7 economically. Also in technology. I mean, all the technology is now in India and partly also in Russia, but in China, not anymore in Europe. We are losing in all these things, but we are putting now more and more money into war, into the NATO, into all these type of things, instead of going around and saying, listen, we have to find a new way of how we live together, and we will be a constructive party in this whole thing.
My last question to you, though, was about how you see, given after Alaska, because you called it a game changer, what is the future of Europe? Because when I look at the goal to have this unipolar moment or a collective hegemony of the West, I always point out that the key criticism in the 90s was this would be a temporary construct, because it would be very costly. Over time, we would exhaust ourselves, spend ourselves into debt, our legitimacy would decline, and then the rest of the world would begin to collectively balance us. Now you see this having happened. I mean, the Americans are now $37 trillion in the hole in debt. This is then manifesting itself as socioeconomic problems within political polarization, a lack of legitimacy of media, politicians. So all the problems we see now, but also that the rest of the world would engage in this collective balancing, because they wouldn't want to be, held down in order to keep this hegemonic system in place. And the more the hegemony would try to assert itself, the more the international system would begin to balance. And you see this now with this, as you said, this secondary sanction threats against India, a country that really, really wants to get along with the West. Now they're realizing that, okay, they're going to have to learn to depend less on the West, because we're weaponizing the dependence. So it seems as if the rest of the world's kind of losing its faith in Europe. We do look a bit like the crazy person in the room at times, and the Americans, they want to pivot to Asia. The Russians want to focus more on Asia. What is the future of Europe in this? Because it's very hard to see how Europe is going to find its place in this new multipolar world. We keep fighting and fighting to restore this unipolar moment, but doing so only incentivizes the rest of the international system to push back and decouple to a large extent. So I don't know. Do you have any optimistic thoughts, I guess, around future views
of the European Union is to accept there will be a multipolar world. The only conclusions they draw from it, that in this multipolar world, they must be one of the three superpowers in the world. That's what it is. So it is already accepting that the unipolar world will not happen anymore. But that's also why we take these very aggressive attitudes, and it will not happen. I have 4 children. I have now my 5th grandchild is coming, and I think I will end up with 9, I think, before I go in a box. So I'm very much future-oriented, and I see the future of Europe extremely bleak, because the decline of the economy we see in Europe will accelerate. We cannot survive if we don't get along with Asia. If now Asia is cut off by Russia controlling the whole line from the Bering Sea to the Black Sea, and we think that through Armenia we have a loophole or somehow, it's completely crazy. We need Russia because of its raw materials, because of the energy, because of also the trade. We have to have access to Central Asia. We need the access to India, and we need the land bridge to China. And we do everything to block this off. I mean, I don't know. I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I'm just writing a booklet on the UN Charter, because I think the UN Charter, and I'm a great defender of the UN Charter, also because I've been in so many countries with the wars. And, then you have this little booklet virtually under your pillow, because if you don't have this one, you would have no value system at all to adhere to, why there should be negotiations, why we should have peace. We in Europe have completely ignored the UN Charter. We speak about the rules-based order. This doesn't exist. The rules-based order is never recognized by any other country except in NATO countries. And for them, rules-based order means you set the rules, you do what you want, but you insist that we do other things. It is not coming. We have to go back to the UN Charter, which is greatly supported. I mean, if you look at the founding documents of BRICS, it's the UN Charter on top. Non-interference in the internal affairs of other states. And so, I mean, all these principles from the UN Charter. Where do we find it in the West? We need it much more, because for a very simple reason, the development of military systems and the speed with which they can nowadays be delivered doesn't allow wars as a solution for political conflicts. So we have to go back to the Charter, which says we should negotiate our conflicts. And we should try everything, international courts, whatever things, but all peace-building measures to prevent, because we will continue to have conflicts among states, but we should not have it to go to war. So it will be a booklet, and I will also do it in English.
I look forward to seeing that. And yeah, well, again, this is the problem, I think, now for the Europeans. We're becoming, by cutting ourselves off from the rest of the world, we become not just Russia, China, but now India as well, apparently, or increasingly at least.
Africa also. I mean, look what happens in Africa.
Yeah. Well, this results in excessive dependence on the US, to the point where it's becoming appropriate to speak of Europe as a vassal, but yet the Americans doesn't even want to be here. So they want to go to Asia. So it's such a horrible position to be in, and I can't understand the strategy behind it, which is why I'm a bit frightened when I speak to members of the EU Parliament. I can't understand it either. So I would hope that there would be some strategic rethinking and adjust to the world as it is, reality, because I think this is very, very quickly going the wrong way. But I very much hope you're correct, though, that this Alaska will be a game changer.
Let me just say, the UN Parliament I find very difficult. It's an extremely pro-war parliament. And I have now created with some friends a working group on peace. And you believe it or not, there was no working group, with all the working groups they have, on peace for the last 8 years in the European Parliament. Apparently peace is not an issue for them. And also we didn't get the agreement, so we have to call it an informal peace working group, whatever it is. That means that we won't get any money for it. It's all very, very difficult. I think by the beginning of next year, we think if we, across several parties, we could develop a manifest, nothing more than 2-3 pages, where this reflects what kind of European Union we want to have. And that must be, of course, a European Union that is not militarized, that looks for peace and all the rest of it. And maybe I will ask you to help me to draft this bloody document, because it has to be very, very much to the point. And I could, of course, being a member of parliament, I could bring this into parliament as a document of the parliament. It's the only strength I have. And we have to change. The time is not ripe for them to think differently. But with Alaska, we come to it much closer, that there has to be a rethinking also in the European Parliament. So let's try if we can have an impact on this.
Yeah, well, we're happy to participate, and yeah, thank you so much for
thank you.
Sharing your thoughts on this important, very important summit. I think it was too many people maybe dismissed it because it didn't deliver a peace right away, but I think this will be a very long process, but this I think was a very important start to it though. So so thank you again.
So I see you next time in Netherlands.
Yes, I might drop by there very soon actually.
and send me your email address, and then I will. Okay. Thanks a lot.
Bye.
Thank you.